The call came in at 2:47 in the morning, and I know the exact time because I'd been awake anyway, sitting in the dark kitchen with a glass of water I hadn't touched, listening to the house settle the way old houses do when the temperature drops. It was my son. His voice had that particular flatness that men use when they're trying not to fall apart. "Dad, it's Elliot. I need you to come to the hospital." I was in my car before he finished the sentence. Elliot is my youngest. 34 years old, works in logistics, coaches his daughter's soccer team on weekends. He married my daughter-in-law 9 years ago, and I'd watched him become the kind of man I hoped I'd raised. Steady, quiet, the type who shows up. His daughter, my granddaughter Lily, had woken up that night with a fever of 104 and a rash spreading across her chest that her pediatrician, reached by phone, said couldn't wait until morning. I drove 40 minutes to St. Andrew's Medical Center in the dark. When I got to the pediatric ER, Elliot was in the waiting area alone, still in the clothes he'd worn to work the day before, a coffee cup in his hands that had to be cold by then. Lily was in a room down the hall being evaluated. He stood when he saw me, and I could see he hadn't slept. "Where's Vanessa?" I said. He looked at me for a moment before he answered. "She said she needed space." I didn't ask what that meant right then. I sat down next to him and we waited together the way fathers and sons do when there's nothing useful to say. It was 3 hours later. Lily stabilized, resting, a viral infection that had scared us badly but was manageable. That Elliot's phone lit up on the chair between us. He glanced at it and then went very still. That stillness was something I recognized. It was the stillness of a man reading something that changes the shape of a room. He handed me the phone without a word. The text was from his wife. "I'm sorry, I'm not coming back. I'm in Phoenix with someone. I need you to know I've already moved money out of our joint savings. I left you enough to cover the month. I'd been unhappy for a long time, and I should have said so before now. Please don't call me tonight." I read it twice. Then I set the phone down on the chair between us. Elliot was staring at the floor. Down the hall, somewhere behind a door, his daughter was sleeping off a fever. "How long have you known?" I asked. "About the unhappiness." He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. I knew something was wrong. I didn't know about the someone. I wanted to say something useful. "I'm 63 years old and I've lived through things. I buried my wife 11 years ago. I've had my share of hard seasons." And I could not find a single sentence that seemed worth saying out loud, so I put my hand on the back of his neck the way I used to when he was small, and I kept it there, and we sat in that waiting room while the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the night shift moved quietly past the door. When dawn came, and Lily was cleared to go home, Elliot carried her to his car wrapped in a hospital blanket. She was half asleep, her arms around his neck. He buckled her in and stood by the open car door for a moment, looking down at her, and the expression on his face is something I'll carry for the rest of my life. It was love and devastation at the same time. The two things sitting right next to each other, without apology. I followed them home. The house was wrong when we walked in, not dramatically. The furniture was there, the pictures on the wall. The kitchen still smelled faintly of whatever they'd had for dinner 2 nights ago. But there were gaps. Closet doors that didn't quite hide the empty spaces behind them. A bathroom counter with a clean rectangle and a dust where something had sat for years. She planned this. That was the part that didn't leave me. I got Lily settled on the couch with her blanket and a cartoon she liked, and then Elliot sat down at the kitchen table and opened the banking app on his phone. I watched his face as he scrolled. She'd taken $22,000. Their joint savings, 9 years of overtime, of skipped vacations, of the careful small decisions that married people make without knowing they're building something. $22,000, moved 3 days before that text. He'd had no idea. He set the phone down and looked out the kitchen window. "I have enough for 6 weeks," he said. "Maybe 8 if I'm careful." He wasn't panicking. That was almost worse. He was already calculating, already doing the mental math, already standing at the edge of the new version of his life and measuring the drop. "You're not doing this alone," I said. He looked at me with the face of a man who is too tired to argue and too proud to agree. I know that face. I wore it myself once. I stayed for 4 days. I slept on the couch and I made breakfast, and I drove Lily to her friend's house when Elliot had to go into work, because life doesn't pause for any of this, not even for a little girl who'd just been in the hospital. I watched my son move through his house like a man learning the dimensions of a room he'd never expected to be in. On the second evening, after Lily was asleep, Elliot told me the rest of it. He'd known something was wrong for about a year. There was a colleague, someone from a company's Denver office, who'd started coming through Phoenix for quarterly meetings. She'd mentioned him once or twice. He hadn't thought much of it. He trusted her. That was the word he kept coming back to. He trusted her, and trusting her had felt like the right thing to do. The mature thing. The thing that good marriages are built on. And he'd been wrong. I didn't want to be the jealous husband, he said. I didn't want to make something out of nothing. You weren't wrong to trust her, I said. She was wrong to betray it. You didn't say anything for a while. Lily's going to ask questions, he said eventually. Kids always do. What do I tell her? I thought about my own children when their mother got sick. About the questions I didn't have good answers to. About how the wrong answer said with love is sometimes better than the right answer said badly. You tell her the truth in the pieces she can hold, I said. Not all at once, just as much as fits. The next morning I called my brother. He's been a family attorney for 30 years, handles divorces, knows the law in this state. I explained the situation, the missing money, the text, the daughter, the timeline. He was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line. That transfer could be considered marital waste, he said. Depending on how the judge reads it, Elliot may be entitled to claim that money is part of the division. He needs to document everything now. Bank statements going back at least 18 months. Any communication about the account, whatever he can get his hands on. What about the daughter? If she's been the primary caregiver, he has a very strong case for physical custody. He needs to file quickly and establish a pattern of care before she gets an attorney who tells her to come back and contest it. I wrote everything down on the back of an envelope from the kitchen counter. Old habit. That afternoon, Elliot called a family law attorney. Her name was Gwen. Someone a coworker had used through a difficult situation a few years back. She was direct and unhurried, and she asked good questions. By the end of the call, Elliot had a consultation scheduled, a list of documents to gather, and a slightly different look in his eyes. Not hope, exactly. More like orientation. The sensation of knowing which direction you're facing. The weeks that followed were hard, in a specific, grinding way that only people who've been through this kind of thing understand. Elliot went to work. He brought Lily to school. He made dinner. He answered the texts from his wife's attorney, which started arriving about 10 days after she left. Formal, measured language asking about assets and scheduling and Lily's current living situation. He forwarded them to Gwen without responding directly. There was one night, maybe 3 weeks in, when he called me just to talk. It was late. Lily was asleep, and he was sitting in his backyard, and he wasn't even sure what he needed, he said. Just someone to talk to. We talked for 2 hours about nothing much. His sister's kids. A fishing trip we'd taken when he was 12. The way his mother used to make coffee, the particular ritual of it. The sound of the percolator in the morning that I still sometimes expect to hear when I wake up. Do you miss her? He asked at some point. He meant his mother. Every day, I said, less sharp than it used to be, but still there. How long until it's less sharp? I knew he wasn't asking about his mother. Longer than you want it to be, I said. Shorter than you think. The mediation took 4 sessions. Vanessa was represented. She showed up for the first 2 in person and then remotely for the last 2. Her attorney was careful and professional. The money was addressed. The $22,000 was characterized as improper dissipation of marital assets, and a portion of it was factored into the settlement in Elliot's favor. Not everything, but enough to matter. Custody was not contested in the end. She agreed to joint legal custody and primary physical with Elliot. Lily would spend alternating weekends with her mother, who had taken an apartment in Scottsdale by then. The Phoenix man, I gathered, was already less present than he'd been. These things tend to unfold predictably. The first weekend Lily went to her mother's, Elliot called me from his truck in the driveway. He hadn't driven anywhere. He'd just been sitting there. House is quiet, he said. Yeah. I don't know what to do with myself. You've got 48 hours. What do you want to do? Long pause. I think I want to fix the fence in the backyard, the one I've been putting off since last spring. Then fix the fence. He laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd heard from him in weeks. He fixed the fence. Lily came home Sunday afternoon with a drawing she'd made at her mother's. A house with 4 windows, a sun, 3 stick figures of varying heights. She held it out to Elliot with the particular seriousness of a 7-year-old presenting something important. "This one's you," she said, pointing to the tallest figure. "And this one's me. And this one's Grandpa." Elliot glanced at me over her head. I looked at the drawing. She'd drawn a house with all the people who were still there. I didn't cry in front of them. I waited until I was in my car in the driveway, and then I sat there for a minute with my hands on the wheel, and I let it come, the way you let a hard season come when it's finally done. Not with relief exactly, but with the quiet recognition that you made it through. My son is not the same man he was before that 2047 call. Neither of us expected him to be. But he's still the man, I raised. Steady, quiet, the kind who shows up. His daughter knows her father is there. That's the thing no one can take from her. There's a lesson in this about money, about joint accounts and the way we trust people with our most practical vulnerabilities. I've heard the arguments, keep separate accounts, never commingle finances, all the wisdom that feels obvious after the fact. Maybe, but I've also seen marriages built on exactly that kind of shared vulnerability, and most of them work fine, because most people are not Vanessa. The lesson isn't, keep your money separate. The lesson is know who you're building with. Elliot knows now. And for all the cost of learning it, I believe he'll be all right. Last Saturday I drove up, and we fixed the back porch steps together, which had been on the list longer than the fence. Lily ran around the yard and brought us things she found, a good stick, a smooth rock, a caterpillar she named temporarily before letting it go. At one point she climbed up on the steps we were building and stood there with her hands on her hips and declared that we were doing a very good job. Elliot and I looked at each other. "High praise," I said. "Highest," he said. We went back to work. I'd been thinking about what Lily drew that afternoon. 3 stick figures, a house, a sun. She drew the people who stayed. A 7-year-old doesn't have language for betrayal or abandonment, but she has instinct. She knew who showed up, and she put them in the picture. Kids always know. What happened to my son wasn't random. Vanessa made choices over a long period of time. Small ones at first, probably. The kind that feel harmless until they compound into something irreversible. She chose silence over honesty when the marriage got hard. She chose to plan in secret rather than speak in the open. And then, when she finally left, she left the way people leave, when they've already decided the other person doesn't deserve a real goodbye. Every one of those choices had a consequence, not as punishment from some outside force, just as the natural result of what those choices actually were. When you drain a joint account and disappear while your child's father sits in an emergency room, you are telling the world exactly who you are. The world tends to remember. Elliot's choices had consequences too, and his were different. He got up every morning when he didn't feel like it. He made breakfast when he wasn't hungry. He drove Lily to school and coached her soccer team and fixed the fence in the backyard and sat on the porch steps until they were solid enough to stand on. None of that was dramatic. None of it made the news, but it accumulated the same way the betrayal accumulated, quietly, over time, into something that held weight. That's the thing I want people who are watching this to sit with. The unglamorous daily choices are the ones that actually build a life, not the grand gestures, not the speeches. The Wednesday morning when you're exhausted, and you get up anyway. The moment when your instinct is to collapse, and you do the next right thing instead. That's not a personality trait you're born with. It's something you practice until it becomes who you are. Elliot practiced it without knowing he was practicing it. And when the floor dropped out, he had something underneath him. I'm 63. I've watched a lot of people move through hard seasons. The ones who come out the other side with any kind of dignity intact are almost always the ones who stayed honest. With themselves, with the people they were responsible for, with the situation as it actually was rather than as they wished it were. My son never pretended things were fine when they weren't. He didn't perform strength for Lily's benefit by lying to her. He told her the truth in pieces she could hold. That's a kind of moral clarity that costs something. especially when you're hurting, and he had it when it mattered. I made one call the morning after I read that text. I called my brother because I knew what my son needed, and I knew I couldn't provide all of alone. That's its own kind of wisdom, knowing when the problem requires more than what you have in your hands, and reaching for the right resource without letting pride get in the way. Elliot did the same when he called Gwen. He swallowed whatever embarrassment comes with admitting that your life has fallen apart, and he made the practical call. Smart people do that. They don't confuse suffering alone with being strong. Lily came home from her mother's that first Sunday and showed us her drawing. She put us in it. Her father, her grandfather, herself. She left room in the picture for the life that was still going. That's the whole story, really. You make room for what's still going.